In the beginning, there was silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence before creation, the quiet hum of the Force breathing across the galaxy. Long before the fall of the Republic, before the rise of the Empire, and before the first lightsaber was ever ignited in defiance or hope, the Force moved unseen through the stars, guiding destiny toward a small, verdant world shrouded in mist. It was here, on this unnamed planet far beyond the reaches of galactic maps, that a child would be born, one who would outlive empires, witness the death of ages, and one day teach the galaxy what it true lie meant to be in harmony with the Force. No records speak of this world. The Jedi archives, vast and proud, hold not even a whisper of its name. It was a place untouched by war, veiled in eternal twilight, where the air shimmered with life and the ground pulsed faintly with the breath of the Force itself. The beings who lived there, Yoda species, were few in number, ancient, and deeply attuned to the natural flow of existence. They did not seek to master the Force, for they understood something that much of the galaxy would forget, that the Force cannot be possessed. It can only be lived. No records speak of this world. The Jedi archives, vast and proud, hold not even a whisper of its name. It was a place untouched by war, veiled in eternal twilight, where the air shimmered with life and the ground pulsed faintly with the breath of the Force itself. The beings who lived there, Yoda species, were few in number, ancient, and deeply attuned to the natural flow of existence. They did not seek to master the Force, for they understood something that much of the galaxy would forget, that the Force cannot be possessed. It can only be lived. From birth, Yoda was different. Not in form, for his people all bore the same small stature and wise, knowing eyes, but in spirit. Even as an infant, he was said to be drawn toward the ancient trees that whispered in the wind, staring into the mists as if listening to voices beyond the veil of time. The elders noticed his quiet focus, the way he seemed to sense storms before they came, or pause at night to gaze up at the stars with a kind of yearning, as though he somehow understood that his path would not remain hidden among these tranquil hills. The galaxy beyond this forgotten world was ancient and turbulent. The old Republic, still in its infancy, stretched its influence across 1,000 systems, stitching together worlds in fragile peace after centuries of darkness. The scars of the old Sith wars had not yet faded. Entire planets still bore the marks of ancient battles, craters filled with rainwater where lightsabers once clashed, ruins half swallowed by sand. Though peace had been declared, the shadow of ambition never truly died. In this era of rebuilding, the Jedi Order began to emerge once again as a symbol of light, gathering students from across the stars to rebuild a code that would endure for millennia. Far from the gleaming towers of Coruscant, the Force stirred. Somewhere deep within its boundless current, a spark of destiny flared. One night, as twin moons rose above the canopy of his homeworld, Yoda dreamed. He saw a vast galaxy, stars burning, falling, and being reborn. He saw temples rising from oceans, and warships darkening skies. And in every image, he heard a voice. It was not a voice of command, but of invitation. It called him to leave, to wander, to seek. When he awoke, he could not explain the feeling that gripped him, only that he must follow it. It was said that when the Jedi first found Yoda, he was not seeking them, he was already on his way to meet them. His small transport, damaged and drifting, was discovered by a passing Republic vessel. On board, a young being sat calmly among the wreckage, unafraid. When questioned, he simply said he was following a dream. To the crew, he was a curiosity. To the Jedi Master accompanying them, he was something far greater, a child surrounded by an energy that felt ancient, as though the Force itself had chosen to reveal a forgotten truth through him. Thus began Yoda's journey into the greater galaxy, a journey that would span centuries. He was brought to Coruscant, to the Jedi temple whose golden spires caught the morning sun. There, among countless other initiates, Yoda took his first steps into the world of the Jedi. But though he was small and quiet, the Master soon saw that the Force flowed through him like a living current. He did not command it as others did. He listened. He waited. He learned that the Force was not a tool to shape the world, but the very rhythm by which the world existed. In the decades to come, Yoda would speak little of his origins. Some believed his world lost to time. Others thought it deliberately hidden, protected by the will of the Force. Yoda never confirmed either. For him, the past was not a place to return to. It was a foundation upon which to build understanding. What mattered was the now, the living moment between light and dark, where choice defined destiny. As he grew, the galaxy changed around him. The Republic expanded its borders. The Jedi became more than wanderers. They became guardians of peace, keepers of balance. Yet even as Yoda learned to walk among the great halls of the temple, he sensed an echo within the Force, a subtle imbalance, like a dissonant note in a perfect symphony. The galaxy was healing, yes, but beneath that healing was restlessness. A hunger. It was as if the Force itself knew that the light which grew so bright would one day cast a shadow just as deep. In time, Yoda would forget the sound of the rain that once fell on his homeworld, but not the feeling. The calm between heartbeats, the whisper that the Force was not something distant but alive within all things. These truths would shape everything he became. He would come to see that the Jedi, for all their wisdom, often forgot this simplicity. They built temples, codified teachings, and sought order, yet the Force had no need for walls or laws. It flowed through chaos as easily as through peace. Before his name became legend, before his wisdom was sought by thousands, Yoda was simply a being trying to understand why he had been chosen. Why him, among countless others, was called by the Force. Perhaps the answer was never meant to be known. For even in his earliest years, one truth began to crystallize, that the Force does not choose the mighty, nor the ambitious, nor the pure. It chooses those willing to listen. And so, in the quiet mists of a forgotten world, destiny began its slow unfurling. The child who listened to the wind would one day stand before the rise and fall of empires. The galaxy would come to know his name, but few would ever understand that his journey began not in conquest or prophecy, but in stillness, in the sacred silence before the dawn. The halls of the Jedi Temple were a living monument to serenity, and yet, for a child newly arrived from the stars, they were also overwhelming. To young Yoda, the temple was a world unto itself. Light spilled through towering windows, catching the air in quiet beams that danced with motes of dust, and the faint hum of distant lightsabers echoed like a heartbeat in meditation. Thousands of years of wisdom lived here, carved into the very stone. But for one so small, so unassuming, it was not power or prestige that drew his gaze. It was the stillness at the heart of it all. He came to the temple as an outsider, species unknown, homeworld forgotten. Yet the Jedi did not see him as a curiosity. They saw potential. The Masters sensed the Force within him, ancient and patient, like a deep river that had been flowing long before any of them were born. When the others spoke of the Force, they used words like control and discipline. But even as a child, Yoda spoke of listening. When asked what the Force felt like, he said, simply, "It feels like everything." He was assigned to the initiate clans, groups of younglings who lived, studied, and trained together. Each day began before dawn, meditation, followed by lessons in philosophy, then sparring and study. It was a life of routine and rigor, built to forge patience, humility, and discipline. For many, it was also a struggle. The Jedi path was not meant to be easy. The younglings learned early that emotion was both power and peril, that attachment could cloud judgment, and fear could twist even the purest heart. Yoda absorbed every lesson, but not as others did. While others strove to master the Force, he sought to understand it. When a fellow student grew frustrated at failing to lift a stone, Yoda would sit beside them and remind them to breathe. He once told a teacher that the Force moves the stone only when the mind stops trying to. The master said nothing then, but later remarked to another that the smallest of their students might one day become their greatest teacher. Centuries later, those early days would fade into myth. Yet for Yoda, they were the crucible that shaped his soul. The temple was not just a place of learning, it was a mirror. Every triumph reflected a shadow. Every success carried a whisper of temptation. He began to sense that the true struggle of the Jedi was not fought with blades, but within the heart. To hold peace in a galaxy that would never stop changing, that was the eternal trial. The youngling clans often gathered in the room of 1,000 fountains, a sanctuary of water and light, where students learned the art of calm. Here, surrounded by the soft echo of falling streams, Yoda spent hours in silence. He would sit so still that even the other younglings began to think he had fallen asleep. But he was listening. Listening to the rhythm of the fountains, to the breathing of the temple itself, to the living pulse of the Force that flowed through every molecule of air. It was here that he first began to sense something beyond himself, a unity that connected all life, even those who could not touch the Force consciously. His teachers soon noticed his progress. Not through his strength in combat, nor his precision in meditation, but through the quiet way others began to follow his example. When one youngling fell behind, Yoda would help them train. When another grew angry, he would speak softly until the tension eased. He was not commanding, He was understanding. It became clear that his connection to the Force was rooted not in domination, but in empathy. But even paradise casts a shadow. As the galaxy beyond the temple stirred with political ambition and unrest, the Order faced choices that would echo for centuries. The Jedi were guardians of peace, yet the Senate increasingly called upon them to act as enforcers. Whispers of corruption began to spread across the core worlds. Yoda, still only a student, could not yet comprehend the scale of these changes. But he could feel it, a faint tremor in the current of the Force. Something vast was shifting. He asked his teachers about the feeling, that quiet unease that came during meditation, like a storm on the horizon. They told him it was the natural cycle of the Force, light and dark forever ebbing and flowing. But even then, Yoda wondered, if balance was the true nature of the Force, why did the Jedi fear the dark so deeply? It was a question he would carry for the rest of his life. When he reached the age of ascension, Yoda stood before the High Council for the first time. The chamber was enormous, its walls curved and its windows framed the endless sky. Before him sat 12 masters, their forms still as statues, their minds as sharp as crystal. Yoda was asked what the Force meant to him. Others had spoken of destiny, power, and purpose. Yoda's answer was simple: the Force is life. And life, I must learn to serve. The chamber fell silent. And in that silence, the council saw something remarkable, not the promise of greatness, but the acceptance of humility. The mark of a true Jedi. That day, Yoda was chosen as a Padawan. His training as an apprentice would take him far from the safety of the temple, into the wider galaxy where chaos and compassion danced side by side. But as he bowed before his new master, he felt no pride, no fear, only gratitude. For in his heart, he knew that the Force had not called him to be a conqueror or a hero. It had called him to listen, to learn, and to serve the balance that held the stars together. That day, Yoda was chosen as a Padawan. His training as an apprentice would take him far from the safety of the temple, into the wider galaxy where chaos and compassion danced side by side. But as he bowed before his new master, he felt no pride, no fear, only gratitude. For in his heart, he knew that the Force had not called him to be a conqueror or a hero. It had called him to listen, to learn, and to serve the balance that held the stars together. The boy from the mists of an unnamed world was no longer a foundling. He was a Jedi, small in stature, vast in spirit, and bound forever to the current of destiny. The galaxy would not yet know his name. But already, the ripples of his journey had begun to spread, quiet, unseen, unstoppable, through the living Force itself. There comes a moment in every Jedi's life when training ends, and the galaxy itself becomes the teacher. For Yoda, that moment arrived quietly, without ceremony, without fanfare. He did not seek the title of knight. It came to him as naturally as dawn after a long night of study and silence. The masters had seen enough. His mind was sharp, his will calm, and his understanding of the Force profound beyond measure. And so, with little more than a bow and a blessing, Yoda was sent out into a galaxy that had already begun to forget what peace truly meant. The Republic was vast, its reach stretching from the glittering worlds of the core to the untamed edges of the outer rim. Though it stood as a beacon of civilization, beneath its shining surface lay fractures, political rivalries, forgotten systems left to decay, and whispers of the Sith, long thought extinct, still clinging to the shadows. It was into this uncertain world that Yoda stepped, a small figure cloaked in brown, carrying only a lightsaber and an unshakable faith in the Force. On the desert world of Ord Vau, he helped settle a blood feud that had lasted generations. Two families stood ready to destroy one another, armies gathered, weapons drawn. Yoda stood between them, no armor, no army, and spoke of the futility of vengeance. For 3 days and nights, he mediated their pain, never raising his voice, never drawing his weapon. When dawn broke on the 4th day, the families disarmed themselves. There was no treaty, no celebration, only silence, and the first fragile breath of peace. To Yoda, that silence was victory enough. But not every lesson came with peace. In the outer rim, the remnants of the old Sith Empire still lingered, ruins haunted by echoes of the dark side. Yoda visited these worlds not to fight, but to learn. He would sit for days among the stones, feeling the ancient darkness seeping from soil. He understood that evil was not an external force to be destroyed, but a reflection of imbalance within all living things. The dark side is not born in the shadows, he once wrote in a temple record. It is born in the heart that fears them. There were times when his calm was tested. Once, while aiding a Republic outpost on the storm-racked planet of Maijito, Yoda faced a warlord who had turned his followers into zealots devoted to conquest. When diplomacy failed, and battle was inevitable, Yoda ignited his blade for the first time as a Jedi Knight. The clash was brief, but fierce, a storm within a storm. Lightning split the sky as blue light met red, the Force swirling like a living tempest. When it ended, Yoda stood victorious, but not proud. He looked down at the fallen warlord and felt no triumph, only sorrow. The warlord had been a man blinded by fear, consumed by the illusion of control. From that moment, Yoda vowed that violence would never be his first answer. For even in victory, he felt loss. The loss of what could have been learned had words replaced weapons. It was a lesson that would shape his philosophy for centuries to come. True strength, he realized, was not found in domination but in restraint. Untrul. Years turned into decades. Yoda's reputation grew quietly among the Jedi, not as a warrior, but as a sage. He had seen the breadth of the Republic and the depths of its suffering. He had walked among soldiers, farmers, and kings, and found the same truth in them all. Fear is the root of conflict. The fear of loss. The fear of change. The fear of the unknown. And so he began to teach that courage was not the absence of fear, but the acceptance of it. To feel fear, yet choose peace, that was the path of true mastery. Untrul. On one journey to the ice moon of Ilum, where Jedi constructed their lightsabers, Yoda sought a kyber crystal of his own. He meditated in the cold caverns for days, until he felt the faint pulse of the Force within the frozen stone. The crystal did not call to him with power or promise. It hummed softly, a gentle echo of calm. When he placed it in his lightsaber, its blade glowed a serene green, not the color of battle, but of growth and life. Untrul. The Masters took notice. They saw in Yoda the reflection of what the Jedi were meant to be, not instruments of control, but servants of harmony. He was invited back to the temple to teach, though still young by his species standards. There, he shared stories of the worlds he had seen, the lives he had touched, and the peace that could only be found when one let go of pride. The younglings listened, captivated by the small knight with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Untrul. Yet even as Yoda grew in wisdom, the galaxy continued to drift. The Republic expanded faster than it could govern, and in the shadows of its prosperity, greed began to fester. Corporations exploited worlds under the guise of law. Senators bartered ideals for influence. The Jedi Council found itself drawn into politics, urged to intervene in matters once beneath their concern. Yoda watched this change with quiet unease. He had seen enough of the galaxy to know that peace enforced by power was no peace at all. Untrul. Still, he remained devoted. The code was his compass, the Force his guide. When the Council offered him a seat among them, a rare honor for one so young, he accepted not out of pride, but duty. For he believed that through patience and understanding, even the tide of corruption could be turned. Untrul. But as he took his place within the circle of masters, gazing out over the city world of Coruscant, Yoda could not shake the feeling that something vast was shifting beneath the surface of the Force. The galaxy, so full of light, was beginning to hum with imbalance. He felt it in meditation, in dreams, a tremor that reached across stars. It was faint, but real. A warning that the peace he sought to preserve might one day crumble beneath the weight of its own illusion. Untrul. And so, the young knight became a master, not through conquest, but through insight. The Force had called him to serve, and he had answered. Yet even he could not yet see the shape of destiny forming in the darkness beyond the stars. For now, there was calm. But deep within the current of the Force, a shadow stirred, patient, ancient, and waiting. Untrul. There are moments in history when destiny moves not with thunder, but with silence, when greatness emerges not from ambition, but from devotion. For Yoda, the path to becoming Grand Master was not one of conquest or acclaim. It was the slow unfolding of light through centuries of service, 1,000 small choices made in the quiet pursuit of wisdom. Untrul. Time flowed differently for him. While generations of Jedi lived and passed, Yoda endured, a constant presence in an ever-changing galaxy. Wars rose and fell. Systems joined the Republic, others broke away. Yet through it all, he remained steady, the still point in a galaxy forever in motion. Untrul. In those days, the Jedi were at their zenith. Their numbers filled the temple's halls, their influence stretched from the core to the rim. They were peacekeepers, diplomats, and scholars, guardians of a fragile order built upon trust in the Force. Yoda had served among them for nearly 4 centuries, guiding, teaching, mediating. His wisdom had become legend. Younglings sought his counsel as readily as senators and kings. To them, he was not merely a Jedi, he was the living embodiment of the code itself. Neutral. Yet Yoda never saw himself that way. In his heart, he remained a learner. The galaxy, he often said, was the true teacher, vast, unpredictable, filled with lessons written in starlight and shadow. He spent long years wandering beyond the Council's comfort, visiting forgotten temples and ancient worlds where the Force whispered in tongues older than language itself. On Dagobah Prime, he meditated with mystics who believed the Force was not light or dark, but a single endless current. On Jeddah, he walked among the guardians of the wills, who spoke of balance not as a goal, but as a living rhythm, one that must be felt, not defined. Neutral. These experiences shaped him, deepened him. When he returned to Coruscant, his words carried the weight of the cosmos. He spoke not in absolutes, but in paradoxes. To master the Force, he told the Council, one must first let go of the need to master anything. Many found his teachings perplexing, even frustrating. But they listened, because his calm was undeniable. His presence itself seemed to still the turbulence of those around him. Neutral. It was this serenity that led the Council to an unprecedented decision. For the first time in its long history, a being of Yoda species, small, unassuming, mysterious, would be named Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Not because of seniority, not because of lineage, but because in him, the Council saw what the Order had always sought to embody: harmony. Neutral. The ceremony was quiet, as he requested. No banners, no trumpets, only the hum of Coruscant's winds echoing through the temple's high spires. As he stood before the assembled masters, Yoda bowed his head, the weight of centuries upon his shoulders. He did not see honor in the title. He saw responsibility, and the fear that he might one day fail those who trusted him most. Neutral. As Grand Master, Yoda faced a galaxy in transition. The Republic, though prosperous, was beginning to show signs of decay. Greed whispered in senatorial halls. The Outer Rim clamored for justice. Trade guilds amassed wealth and power beyond the reach of law. The Jedi found themselves called to settle disputes that were no longer moral, but political. Peace was becoming less a state of being, and more a performance, fragile, artificial, bought with compromise. Neutral. Yoda watched this change unfold from the temple's highest balcony, the endless city stretching before him like a living organism. He could feel its pulse in the Force, vibrant, yet sickly. There was light everywhere, but also shadows gathering at its edges. Shadows that moved unseen, patient, and cold. Neutral. During meditation, he began to sense them more clearly. Whispers in the Force, faint, elusive, but undeniable. They spoke not in words, but in sensations, imbalance, hunger, longing. At first, he thought them to be echoes of his own doubt. But the feeling persisted. The galaxy's harmony was shifting. Somewhere, something ancient was awakening. Neutral. He shared his unease with the Council, but few understood. The Sith had been gone for 1,000 years. Their extinction was a matter of history, not debate. The Masters listened respectfully, yet their answers were cloaked in confidence. The dark side cannot rise again, they said. Not while the Jedi endure. Neutral. Yoda wanted to believe them. But in meditation, he saw visions, fleeting and fragmented. A storm of red across the stars. A republic devoured from within. Armies marching beneath banners not yet born. He saw the fall of temples, the death of friends, and in the midst of it all, a single shadowed figure, laughing, unseen, eternal. Neutral. He awoke from these dreams in silence. For centuries, he had taught that fear was the path to the dark side. Now, for the first time, he felt it stir within himself, not fear of death or failure, but of ignorance, of what he could not see. Still, Yoda did not despair. He turned inward, trusting in the will of the Force. If a storm was coming, then so too would come the light to meet it. That was the balance he had learned to trust. And so, he continued his work, training Padawans, guiding knights, advising the Senate when duty demanded. He became a mentor not just in skill, but in patience. To those who sought quick answers, he offered questions. To those who sought certainty, he offered reflection. The greatest wisdom, he often said, is knowing how much remains unseen. Untral. He awoke from these dreams in silence. For centuries, he had taught that fear was the path to the dark side. Now, for the first time, he felt it stir within himself, not fear of death or failure, but of ignorance, of what he could not see. Over time, his words began to echo through the generations. Young Jedi carried them into missions across the stars. His teachings became the foundation of the Temple's philosophy. And while he still felt the tremor of darkness beneath the surface of the Force, he learned to move with it, to trust that even imbalance served a purpose in the greater design. Untral. He awoke from these dreams in silence. For centuries, he had taught that fear was the path to the dark side. Now, for the first time, he felt it stir within himself, not fear of death or failure, but of ignorance, of what he could not see. And yet, somewhere deep within, he could sense the tide turning. The galaxy's rhythm, once gentle, was quickening. The Republic was growing restless. The Jedi, once servants of peace, were being drawn ever closer to politics, to conflict, to control. The light of the Order still burned bright, but its flame flickered in the winds of pride. Standing at the heart of the temple, Yoda closed his eyes and reached into the current of the Force. It flowed through him, stars, lives, destinies, all bound in one endless dance. He could feel every breath, every heartbeat, every joy and sorrow across the galaxy. It was beautiful and terrifying, for within that vast current, he sensed the faintest ripple, a presence watching, waiting, smiling. The Grand Master opened his eyes. The future had already begun to move. And somewhere, beyond the reach of light, the shadow of the dark side stirred once more. Untral. It began not with a roar, but with a whisper. In the height of the Republic's golden age, when the galaxy glittered with peace and prosperity, Yoda felt a tremor deep within the Force, a subtle dissonance, like a single note out of tune in an otherwise perfect symphony. It was faint at first, barely perceptible. But to one who had spent centuries listening to the heartbeat of existence itself, it was enough to stir unease. Untral. The galaxy had forgotten fear. The Jedi Council sat in their towers, their confidence as vast as the city that surrounded them. The Senate thrived on the illusion of harmony, its chambers filled with eloquence and deceit. Planets prospered, trade flowed, and technology bloomed. Yet beneath that shining veneer, something ancient was moving. Something patient. Something hungry. Untral. Yoda watched it unfold with the calm eyes of a master, but inside, he felt a growing weight. The Force spoke to him in currents of shadow, not of events yet seen, but of intentions hidden. He could not name it, and that frightened him more than any enemy ever had. When he meditated, the visions became stronger. The stars dimmed in his mind's eye, swallowed by waves of crimson light. He saw towers crumbling, armies clashing under banners of fire, and a dark will threading its way through the very heart of the Republic. But when he sought clarity, the Force itself seemed to recoil, shrouding its truths in mist. It was as if something, or someone, was clouding it deliberately. In the council chamber, Yoda shared his concerns. His words fell into the silence of polished stone and wary glances. A darkness there is, he told them. Clouded, it has made the Force. Hard to see, the future is. Untral. Mace Windu frowned, his voice steady. We've felt it too, Master Yoda. But the Sith are extinct. Surely this is something else. Something else. Yoda wanted to believe that. He truly did. Yet in his heart, he knew the Sith were never truly gone, only forgotten. Evil, he had long since learned, does not die. It waits. It adapts. It learns the patience of the stars. And so, Yoda began to watch, not for armies or warlords, but for subtler things. The erosion of compassion in politics. The rise of fear disguised as security. The slow, seductive call of power to those unprepared to wield it. He saw senators who once sought justice become servants of greed. He saw Jedi Knights, once humble peacekeepers, praised as heroes and generals. He felt the center of balance slipping, not through battle, but through comfort. The Republic was rotting from within. It was during this time that Yoda first sensed the faint shadow of a new kind of threat, one that did not wield a lightsaber or command fleets, but whispered promises in the ears of the powerful. A politician's smile could now do more harm than a warlord's blade. And though Yoda counseled patience, he could feel the storm gathering. He began to travel again, visiting worlds where unrest had taken root. On Malastare, He watched senators manipulate suffering for profit. On Corellia, he saw factories fueled by exploitation in the name of progress. Even in the temple itself, ambition had begun to creep among the ranks of younger Jedi, their eyes turning toward influence rather than insight. Untril. At night, Yoda would stand alone in the meditation gardens, listening to the hum of the city below. We have grown powerful, he would think, but have we grown wise? The stars above Coruscant glittered coldly, indifferent to his doubts. The darkness he sensed was no longer confined to visions. It had begun to manifest in small but undeniable ways. Reports came in of mysterious uprisings, assassinations, entire colonies disappearing without trace. The Jedi were stretched thin, forced to mediate disputes that had no true solution, only political expedients. And yet, amid the uncertainty, Yoda's calm never faltered. He spoke to the council often of balance, of humility. To see the shadow clearly, he reminded them, stand in the light, one must. But blind, light can make us too. Few understood his warning. Fewer still acted upon it. In truth, Yoda was not immune to doubt. There were nights he questioned whether the Jedi Order, this institution of discipline and doctrine, had lost touch with the living force it claimed to serve. The temple was vast, filled with ancient wisdom, but also rigid traditions. The Jedi Code, once a living philosophy, had hardened into dogma. And in that rigidity, the dark side had found room to grow, not as open rebellion, but as silence, as neglect. The Force itself seemed to mourn. It no longer flowed through the galaxy with the same effortless harmony. It twisted, flickered, resisted. The natural current had become turbulent, heavy with sorrow. Yoda meditated for hours each day, seeking its source, but the more he searched, the more it eluded him. Untril. One evening, while meditating in the Hall of 1,000 Fountains, he saw something, a shadow that took no form, a voice without sound. It passed through him like cold wind, leaving behind only a whisper, "It begins." He opened his eyes, the water before him rippling though no breeze stirred the air. The sound of the temple faded into stillness. He was alone, yet not. The shadow had entered the galaxy fully now. Not long after, in the core worlds, a senator named Palpatine began to rise. A man of charm and intellect, unassuming yet persuasive. Few paid him heed at first, a voice among thousands. But Yoda felt a flicker in the Force each time his name was spoken. It was faint, imperceptible to most. Yet to Yoda, it was unmistakable. The darkness had found its mask. From that moment, Yoda knew the storm could no longer be avoided. The balance he had protected for centuries was tipping, and though he could sense the descent, he could not yet stop it. The Jedi Order stood proud and confident, unaware that the shadow had already entered their midst, not as an enemy at the gate, but as a whisper in their halls. And in the silence of his meditation, Yoda could feel the truth pressing against his heart like the weight of the cosmos itself. Wisdom alone would not be enough to save the galaxy. Untril. The Force had grown silent. For centuries, Yoda had guided the Jedi through ages of light and shadow, trusting always in the current that flowed unseen between all things. But now, that current had become turbulent, clouded by fear, deception, and something else he could not yet name. Meditation brought no clarity. Only echoes. Only silence. The galaxy still called it peace. Yet peace, Yoda had come to realize, could be the most dangerous illusion of all. It was in this fragile calm that destiny took form, not in battle or prophecy, but in the quiet steps of a desert-born boy who would change the fate of the galaxy forever. When Qui-Gon Jinn arrived on Coruscant with young Anakin Skywalker, Yoda felt it before he saw it. A disturbance, not of darkness, but of potential. The boy's presence rippled through the Force like a stone cast into still water, reshaping every reflection. Even before he spoke, even before the council convened, Yoda knew, the future had arrived uninvited. The chamber was heavy with expectation. Qui-Gon stood before the council, defiant yet sincere, conviction burning in his eyes. "He is the chosen one," he said. "You must see it. Born of no father, conceived by the midi-chlorians. He will bring balance to the Force." The words hung in the air like a challenge to time itself. Untril. Yoda closed his eyes, reaching through the Force toward the child. What he felt there was not comfort, but chaos. The boy's presence was vast, too vast, like the heart of a storm. Light and dark swirled within him, indistinguishable. He saw compassion and fear intertwined, love and loss already bound to his destiny. The chosen one, may be, Yoda said softly. But grave danger, I fear, in his training. The council debated long into the night. Tradition clashed with prophecy. Faith collided with reason. Keegan's unshakable belief stood against Yoda's measured caution. For Yoda, the problem was not the boy himself, but what he represented, the return of destiny into a galaxy that had forgotten humility. He had lived long enough to see prophecies twist into ruin. He had seen how easily hope could become obsession, how even good intentions could birth destruction. The Force did not speak in absolutes, yet mortals always tried to force it to. Still, the winds of fate do not wait for consent. Before the Council could reach peace within its own ranks, the galaxy erupted. Naboo was under siege, its queen in peril, and the Sith, long thought extinct, had revealed themselves at last. A warrior cloaked in red and black, his blade a double-edged flame. Darth Maul. The revelation struck like thunder through the Order. For 1,000 years, the Jedi had believed themselves the sole keepers of the Force's legacy. Now, that illusion shattered. The Shadow Yoda had sensed for decades had taken form, and it had killed a Jedi Master. Qui-Gon Jinn fell, his life extinguished by the very darkness he had fought to understand. Untrul. When Obi-Wan returned with the boy, grief and triumph in his eyes, Yoda felt the galaxy shift again. Qui-Gon was gone, but his will remained, and his final wish was now before them. Train the boy. Guide him. Trust the prophecy. In that moment, Yoda faced a choice no wisdom could simplify. Refuse the dying plea of a great Jedi, or accept a student whose very existence could doom them all. The Council's decision was pragmatic. Obi-Wan would train the boy, with their oversight. But for Yoda, the choice lingered in his heart like an unanswered question. Had they acted out of faith, or fear? In the weeks that followed, Yoda often walked alone through the empty halls of the temple, his footsteps echoing like memories. He had seen many apprentices come and go, many wars and reconciliations, but never had he felt the Force so divided. He meditated endlessly, seeking guidance. But where once the Force had spoken in clarity, now it whispered in riddles. Visions came, flashes of flame, the rise of armies, the fall of light. Always, the boy stood at the center, face half in shadow. Untrul. He wanted to believe that the prophecy would save them. That balance, once restored, would heal what time had corrupted. But deep within, Yoda sensed a darker truth. That balance was not peace. It was correction. And correction required destruction. Anakin Skywalker's arrival marked not the dawn of hope, but the beginning of reckoning. Still, Yoda did not despair. He saw in the boy a mirror of his own youth, restless, questioning, unwilling to accept the world as it was. He admired that spirit even as he feared it. In quiet moments, he would visit the training halls, watching Anakin spar from afar. There was brilliance in every movement, and pride in equal measure. The boy was gifted, yes, but power without patience was fire without a vessel. As years passed and the Republic's politics grew ever more tangled, Yoda's doubts hardened into resolve. The Sith had returned, of that he was certain. But where they hid, and how they had endured unseen, he could not yet grasp. The Council searched, investigated, questioned. Yet the Shadow was clever. It moved behind smiles, beneath treaties, inside trust. And through it all, Yoda's greatest fear began to take shape. Not that the dark side had returned, but that the Jedi had grown too proud to see it clearly. As the Naboo victory was celebrated across the galaxy, Yoda stood at the temple's higher spire, the city shimmering below like liquid light. The Senate would call it a triumph. The Jedi would call it justice. But Yoda called it something else. A beginning. He gazed toward the horizon, sensing the faint hum of the future. It was neither light nor dark, merely inevitable. Somewhere far away, a boy dreamed of greatness. And somewhere deeper still, the Force trembled with anticipation. The storm had arrived. Untrul. War. A word that once echoed only in the Jedi archives now filled the air of every world in the Republic. The drums of conflict thundered across the stars, and peace, that fragile dream Yoda had guarded for centuries, shattered like glass beneath the weight of destiny. The Clone Wars had begun. When the first reports reached Coruscant, the Council sat in silence. Systems were breaking away from the Republic, aligning under the banner of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. The galaxy that had once felt infinite and harmonious was now divided by fear, corruption, and ambition. Yet beneath all the chaos, Yoda felt something far worse: orchestration. This war, he sensed, had not arisen by chance. It had been designed. Still, the Jedi were drawn into it, as inexorably as stars pulled into gravity. The Senate declared the formation of a grand army of the Republic, clones bred for obedience, created in secrecy on Kamino. When Yoda first stood among them, the sight struck him deeply. Thousands of identical faces, each life manufactured, each soldier born to die for peace. He felt the weight of that contradiction pierce his soul. The Jedi had always been peacekeepers, not generals. But as the war spread, their sabers became banners of leadership, their wisdom twisted into strategy. Yoda himself took command, not out of pride or power, but because he believed he must lead by example, to shield his order from corruption by standing at its front. He remembered the words of the code: "There is no emotion, there is peace." Yet on the battlefields of Geonosis, there was only death. Untrul. When the first blaster fire ignited, Yoda watched from the command ship, his heart heavy. The galaxy was screaming, every life extinguished echoing through the Force like a ripple of sorrow. But the mission demanded action. He gave the order. The clones advanced. The Jedi led. And the Republic, for the first time in 1,000 years, became an army. Victory came swiftly that day, but Yoda felt no triumph. Only loss. As the war spread to hundreds of worlds, the galaxy transformed. Cities burned. Worlds were reduced to ash. And Yoda, the ancient sage who had once taught patience and balance, found himself standing in the heart of destruction. Each decision weighed upon him like another stone added to an invisible burden. He watched his fellow Jedi change under the strain. Mace Windu grew harder, his compassion tempered into steel. Obi-Wan Kenobi aged beyond his years, carrying the twin burdens of duty and mentorship. And Anakin Skywalker, the boy of prophecy, became both a beacon and a warning. His victories were legendary, his courage unmatched, but behind his eyes burned something restless, something dangerous. Yoda saw it clearly, though he never spoke it aloud. The boy's attachment to those he loved, his refusal to accept loss, it was both his strength and his doom. The Force around him burned too brightly, consuming balance wherever he walked. Yoda feared it, yet could not turn away. Between battles, Yoda returned often to the temple to meditate. But even there, he found no refuge. The once sacred halls now hummed with tension. Younglings trained to the rhythm of distant warfare. The Force itself felt wounded, its flow turbulent, scarred by suffering. The Jedi Council debated strategy, not philosophy. Their visions grew clouded. And in that blindness, the true enemy smiled unseen. Untrul. For in the shadows of the Senate, Chancellor Palpatine rose to unprecedented power. His voice was soft, his demeanor humble, but his influence was vast. Every law passed in the name of safety, every command justified by necessity. And the Jedi, bound by duty, obeyed. Yoda often met with him, the small green master and the aging statesman, two symbols of wisdom speaking in polite tones. But beneath their words, the Force trembled. Yoda could feel it in every syllable Palpatine spoke, the faint taste of manipulation, of dark intent carefully hidden behind warmth. Yet proof eluded him. The Sith hid too well. Each day, Yoda's certainty faded a little more. The Jedi were winning battles, yet losing themselves. The Republic was being saved, yet dying from within. The Force, once his greatest ally, now felt like a fog, dense, resistant, unwilling to reveal its truth. He began to understand that this war was not a conflict of armies, but of souls. The Jedi's faith was being tested, their purpose rewritten. For every planet they liberated, another was lost to doubt. For every victory, another scar marked the galaxy's heart. And Yoda, ancient, wise, revered, began to wonder if perhaps they had already lost. One night, aboard a command ship drifting between stars, Yoda stood before the viewport, watching hyperspace unfold in a blur of light. The clone troopers around him moved with mechanical precision, silent, disciplined. He studied them, their faces the same, their spirits unique. They fought bravely, loyally, yet none had chosen this path. They had been made for it. Untrul. And in their creation, Yoda saw a reflection of the Republic itself, noble ideals shaped into instruments of control. He sighed, the sound barely audible over the hum of the ship. Begun, the Clone War has, he had once said with grim certainty. But now he knew what those words truly meant. Not merely the start of a galactic conflict, but the beginning of the Jedi's undoing. Each choice he made in the name of peace brought them closer to ruin. And yet, in the depth of that despair, Yoda found something unbreakable: resolve. Even if the galaxy burned, he would stand by the light. He would protect life, no matter how dim hope became. He would be the stillness at the center of the storm, even if the storm consumed him. The Clone Wars raged on, endless, merciless, inevitable. And through it all, the small green figure stood unyielding, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and strength. The Grand Master of the Jedi Order. The guardian of a fading truth. But far beyond the front lines, in the shadowed halls of the Senate, the architect of their downfall watched and waited. Every move Yoda made, every battle fought, every life lost, all of it played into the hands of a hidden darkness. The galaxy did not yet see it. The Jedi refused to believe it. But Yoda knew. The war was never about victory. It was about blindness. And soon, that blindness would cost him everything. Untrul. The stars had begun to dim. The war stretched into years, each one eroding the light the Jedi once carried so easily. Where wisdom had once guided them, now weariness reigned. The Jedi Temple, that shining citadel of peace, had become a war room. The laughter of younglings no longer echoed through its halls. Instead, the soft hum of holograms and the grim murmurs of strategy meetings filled its chambers. The twilight of the Jedi had begun. Yoda, older now not in body but in spirit, could feel it in every meditation. The Force no longer spoke as clearly as it once had. Its harmony was fractured, as though the galaxy itself were holding its breath before an unseen calamity. Visions came to him in fragments, glimpses of darkness, of fire, of temples falling and skies burning red. Yet when he reached for clarity, it eluded him. He knew the truth that others could not face. The Jedi were losing themselves long before they would ever fall. Each battle won demanded another sacrifice. Each moral line crossed became easier the next time. Even the greatest among them, Kenobi, Windu, Skywalker, now made decisions guided less by balance and more by survival. The order that had endured for millennia, that had once been the conscience of the galaxy, was now a blade wielded by politicians. And Yoda could no longer deny that he had allowed it. He watched the Senate grant Chancellor Palpatine emergency powers, again and again. Each decree justified, each act necessary, until one man's voice had become the voice of the Republic itself. Untrul. The Sith had not returned with armies of darkness. They had returned through democracy. One evening, Yoda met with Mace Windu in the meditation chamber. The air between them was heavy with unspoken truths. "The dark side surrounds everything now," Windu said, his tone edged with exhaustion. "The Chancellor. I sense a plot to destroy the Jedi." Yoda nodded slowly. "Sense it, I do. But see it, we cannot." That was the tragedy. Their vision, once their greatest strength, now clouded completely. The Force no longer offered clarity. Perhaps it had never intended to. In the following months, the war worsened. Count Dooku's forces struck at the Outer Rim, planets fell into ruin, and heroes became martyrs. Yoda himself led the Republic's armies to Kashyyyk, the world of the Wookiees. Amid the towering forests and ancient trees, he found momentary peace. The natural life around him reminded him of what the galaxy had lost: simplicity, harmony, innocence. But even that peace was fragile. As the battles raged, whispers reached him through the Force, faint, trembling, yet undeniable. A shadow moving within Coruscant itself. A darkness not born on the battlefield, but in the heart of power. Untrul. And then, like the crack of thunder splitting the silence, came the vision. Flashes of betrayal. Jedi falling by the hundreds. A blade ignited in red. The temple burning. The galaxy trembling in despair. When Yoda awoke from the vision, his heart was cold. The prophecy, the chosen one who would bring balance, had become his deepest fear. He saw now that they had misunderstood it. For generations, the Jedi believed balance meant the dominance of the light. But perhaps true balance required destruction of both. Perhaps the Force itself demanded their fall. And in that understanding came the most painful truth of all. The Jedi had not been destroyed by darkness. They had been destroyed by their own blindness. They had fought for peace while waging war. They had preached detachment while clinging to power. They had become the very thing they swore to oppose. Yoda carried that guilt like a wound that would never heal. Late in the war, he returned to the temple alone, walking through corridors that felt more like tombs. He paused at the council chamber, empty now except for shadows. He placed a small clawed hand on the cold floor and whispered to the Force, not for victory, but for understanding. No answer came. Only silence. Untral. Beyond the temple, the galaxy roared with battle. And in the quiet center of it all, Yoda realized that his order's fate was sealed. Still, he would not abandon hope. Hope was not blind optimism to him. It was endurance. To hope was to persist, even when the light had gone out. He returned to the front, commanding, teaching, guiding, though in his heart he knew he was preparing his students not for triumph, but for survival. The end was near, and he could feel it coming like a gathering storm. And somewhere in that storm, a young man stood on the edge of destiny, torn between love and duty, between prophecy and madness. Anakin Skywalker. Yoda saw in him everything the Jedi had once been, and everything they would lose. The twilight deepened, and in the gathering shadows, the first whispers of the end began to echo across the stars. Untral. The Republic died in a single breath. Not with an explosion, not with a declaration, but with an order. A whisper transmitted through the veins of 1,000,000 soldiers. Execute Order 66. Across the stars, Jedi who had fought and bled beside their clone troops turned to find blaster barrels pointed at their backs. In an instant, trust became betrayal. Loyalty became death. The light of the Jedi, carried for thousands of years, was snuffed out in moments of fire and disbelief. And Yoda felt every death. On Kashyyyk, amid the roars of battle and the thunder of blasters, the Force screamed. The Wookiee warriors fought bravely at his side, unaware of the invisible dagger poised above him. As Commander Gree raised his rifle, Yoda moved before the thought could even form. His lightsaber ignited in a green blur, swift, sorrowful, final. The clones fell, their bodies hitting the forest floor with the quiet weight of inevitability. For Yoda, that moment marked the end of innocence. The galaxy he had known, the Republic he had guided, the Order he had protected, was gone. The Sith had not returned through armies or assassins. They had returned through patience, through politics, through the slow corruption of belief. And their victory was complete. Escaping Kashyyyk with the help of Chewbacca and Tarful, Yoda's small figure disappeared into the stars, carrying the unbearable silence of all who had fallen. Each passing system echoed with tragedy, temples burning, masters slaughtered, the Force clouded by grief. Untral. When he finally met with Senator Organa and Obi-Wan Kenobi aboard the Tantive 3, his eyes were heavy with centuries. No words were needed. They all knew. The Jedi were extinct. But one task remained, a reckoning. Through fragmented intelligence, they uncovered the truth. The Sith Lord who had orchestrated the entire war, who had puppeteered both sides, now ruled the galaxy as Emperor. Darth Sidious. It was then that Yoda made his decision. Not of vengeance, but of necessity. The dark side had won not by power, but by deception. If the galaxy was to have any chance at renewal, that deception must be confronted. And so, the last Grand Master of the Jedi Order returned to Coruscant, alone. The city planet that had once shimmered with life now felt like a tomb. Smoke rose from the spires of the Jedi Temple. Statues of the great masters stood in ruin, their faces scorched and cracked. The halls echoed with the ghosts of younglings and teachers alike. Yoda paused there, in the chamber where he had once presided over the council. For a moment, he closed his eyes and bowed his head. Untral. I have failed you all, he whispered. Then he turned toward the Senate, the beating heart of the fallen Republic. Inside the vast rotunda, Emperor Palpatine waited. Draped in shadow, his eyes burned with sickly yellow fire. The air itself seemed to twist around him. So, the great Yoda finally appears, he hissed, voice dripping with mockery. You survived. Yoda's answer was quiet, resolute. At an end your rule is, and not short enough it was. The words were ritual, the calm before the storm. And then, silence shattered. Lightning arced through the air, pure hatred made manifest. Yoda deflected it, his green blade illuminating the chamber with blinding light. What followed was not merely a duel, but a war of philosophies, light and dark colliding in their purest forms. Palpatine fought with rage, with the desperation of one who must destroy to feel secure. Yoda fought with focus, with the calm of one who knows that all power is temporary. Their battle tore through the Senate, hurling platforms into the air, shattering the very symbols of democracy. Untrul. The galaxy itself seemed to tremble as the Force rippled through the room. Yoda gained the upper hand, for a moment. With a surge of will, he disarmed the Emperor, sending him crashing backward. But as Yoda leapt to deliver the final blow, a surge of dark power exploded outward. The impact hurled Yoda across the chamber. He fell, not defeated by strength, but by the sheer weight of darkness that now ruled the galaxy. Hanging from a broken platform, he looked down into the endless depths below. And in that moment, clarity returned. He could destroy the Emperor, perhaps. But in doing so, he would only feed the cycle, another death, another martyr, another shadow cast over the galaxy. The Jedi way was not to conquer, but to endure. He let go. As his small body fell into the Senate's darkness, he became one with the Force. Not in death, but in surrender. When Yoda awoke, he was far from Coruscant, carried to safety by allies who still believed in the faintest spark of hope. The duel was over. The Empire had risen. The Jedi were gone. Untrul. And Yoda, the last of the old masters, vanished into legend. He carried no victory, no army, no temple. Only understanding. The Force, once fractured, now spoke again, quiet, patient, eternal. There was still light. It had not been extinguished, only scattered, waiting to be found again by those brave enough to seek it. And so, Yoda turned away from the galaxy of stars, toward the swamps of a forgotten world. There, his exile would begin, and his enlightenment would follow. Untrul. The stars no longer spoke. When Yoda fled into the outer reaches, he left behind not just a galaxy in ruin, but the weight of 900 years of failure. His ship drifted through the void, a single flicker of life in an endless sea of darkness. The hum of the engines echoed like a heartbeat, faint, fragile, determined. He did not know where he was going, only that the Force was leading him somewhere, hidden, somewhere ancient, somewhere untouched by the corruption of the Republic or the noise of civilization. The world that called to him was Dagobah, a planet steeped in life, primal and untamed. When he descended through its thick clouds, the air was heavy with moisture, the scent of decay and renewal intertwined. The swamp stretched endlessly beneath him, glistening with the strange, luminous energy of the living Force. It was as if the planet itself breathed. Yoda stepped onto the soft earth and closed his eyes. Here, the Force was raw, not divided into light or dark, but whole. The cycles of life and death intertwined seamlessly, every insect, every root, every drop of rain part of a vast, living consciousness. He had found what he had lost, not the Order, not the Republic, but balance. Dagobah became both his refuge and his mirror. The swamp swallowed all sound except for the rhythm of life. In the beginning, Yoda struggled with silence. His mind, once surrounded by councils and students, now echoed with memories. Every fallen Jedi, every mistake, every moment of pride and blindness replayed endlessly. Untrul. He meditated beneath twisted trees, seeking clarity, but the Force did not speak. Not until he stopped asking. Only then did it answer. Visions came to him, not of battles or prophecies, but of understanding. He saw how the Jedi, for all their wisdom, had tried to control what was never meant to be controlled. They had divided the Force into light and dark, good and evil, as though the galaxy could be measured by absolutes. But Dagobah showed him the truth. The Force was not a war to be won. It was a current to surrender to. In time, the ghosts of the past began to visit. One night, as the mists curled through the trees, a familiar presence appeared, luminous, calm, radiant. Keegan Jin. Yoda, the voice said, echoing softly through the Force, there is no death. There is only the Force. Through Keegan's teaching, Yoda learned a truth greater than all his centuries of study, that consciousness could endure beyond death. That by releasing attachment, even to life itself, one could become one with the eternal flow. Untrul. He practiced this for years, mastering not the art of war, but the art of being. He listened to the songs of insects, the movements of the wind, the slow drip of water from vine to pool. Each sound was a lesson. Each silence, a teacher. In solitude, Yoda found enlightenment. But enlightenment did not erase sorrow. There were nights when he looked up at the faint stars and thought of those who were lost, of Windu's defiance, Kenobi's steadfastness, Anakin's fall. He did not curse them. He pitied them. For he knew now that every being walks the same path, through fear, through failure, toward understanding. Time became meaningless on Dagobah. Seasons blurred. The galaxy continued to turn without him. The Empire grew strong, cruel, unchallenged. But Yoda waited. Not for vengeance, not for redemption, for balance. And then, one day, the Force stirred differently. A new presence touched the current. Young, reckless, hopeful. The son of the Fallen One. Luke Skywalker. The moment Yoda sensed him, something within him shifted. Not triumph, but purpose. The long silence had ended. The Force was ready to move again. Untrul. Yoda's exile had not been punishment. It had been preparation. He understood now that his failure had been necessary, that the fall of the Jedi was not the end of light, but the pruning of a tree grown too rigid, too proud. Through destruction came renewal. Through loss, wisdom. As Yoda sat upon his humble root hut floor, the mist curling around his small frame like a shroud, he smiled faintly. The galaxy had forgotten him, but the Force had not. He was no longer the Grand Master of the Jedi. No longer the general, the warrior, or the teacher of councils. He was simply a servant of the Force, patient, waiting for the one who would carry the torch anew. And so, as storms raged outside and the swamps whispered ancient songs, Yoda waited. Not for victory. For destiny. The time of the Jedi was not yet gone. Only dormant, like embers waiting for breath. And soon, that breath would come. Untrul. The years had weathered him into stillness. On Dagobah, time no longer passed, it simply was. The swamp breathed and sighed in rhythm with the Force itself, and Yoda, its smallest inhabitant, had become part of that rhythm. He was no longer a figure of power or command, but of presence, a quiet guardian of wisdom the galaxy had forgotten. Then, one day, destiny arrived in a ship. The silence of the swamp was broken by the crackle of engines and the crash of metal through mud. Yoda watched as the craft tore through the canopy and sank into the mire, its smoke mingling with the mist. He felt it before he saw it, that spark, faint yet familiar. The Force stirred in a way it had not in decades. When the boy stepped out, bewildered and determined, Yoda's heart trembled. Luke Skywalker. The son of Anakin, the son of the chosen one who had fallen into shadow. For a long time, Yoda said nothing. He only observed. The boy was impulsive, impatient, and full of questions, so much like his father that it hurt. And yet, beneath that restlessness burned something different, a quiet grief and a hunger to understand. In that moment, Yoda made a choice. He would not reveal himself as master, not yet. For to teach Luke the Force, he must first strip away arrogance and expectation. He must teach him humility, the first and hardest lesson. Untrul. And so, the old master played the fool. He scurried through the swamp with mischievous laughter, rummaging through supplies, speaking in riddles. Luke's frustration grew, and Yoda saw in that anger the reflection of the same pride that had doomed Anakin. Only when the boy's impatience reached its breaking point did Yoda drop the act. His voice, calm and ancient, filled the small hut. I cannot teach him. The boy has no patience. Obi-Wan's voice, faint and ghostly, answered from beyond. He will learn patience. Yoda closed his eyes. Perhaps he will. The next morning, training began. Day after day, under the heavy air of Dagobah, Luke ran, lifted, fell, and rose again. The swamp became his temple, the air his scripture. Yoda's lessons were not about power, but balance, about feeling, not controlling. Luminous beings are we, he told him, not this crude matter, Untrul. Luke listened, but only half understood. His mind was always elsewhere, on his friends, on the war, on his destiny. Yoda felt the shadow of failure approaching once more. The same impatience that had undone Anakin now threatened the son. But he did not scold him. Instead, he guided him through failure. When Luke's X-Wing sank into the swamp, the boy despaired. I can't, he said. And Yoda, small and unshakable, raised his hand. The air shifted, the swamp hushed. Slowly, impossibly, the ship rose, water dripping, vines breaking, until it floated before them, shimmering in the mist. I don't believe it, Luke whispered. That, Yoda said, is why you fail. It was not condemnation. It was truth. A truth Yoda himself had once resisted. That belief was the bridge between the possible and the infinite. But still, Luke was not ready. He left before his training was complete, driven by attachment, to save his friends, to prove himself, to rewrite fate. Yoda watched him depart, the roar of engines fading into the clouds. Much anger in him, he murmured to the ghost of Obi-Wan. Like his father. Then we must trust in him, Kenobi replied. Yoda sighed. Yes, we must. Years passed. The galaxy continued its slow dance between hope and despair. Yoda remained in solitude, meditating on the ripples of the Force. He felt Luke's pain, his defeats, his growth. Each echo carried both fear and light. And then, one final time, the Force whispered. A familiar presence, weaker now, but steady. Luke had returned. When the young man entered Yoda's hut again, his face was different. Older. Tired. Wiser. The spark had become a flame. Yoda lay upon his bed, the firelight flickering across his weathered skin. His breaths were shallow but peaceful. Luke knelt beside him, desperate for answers. I am ready, Master Yoda, he said. Yoda smiled faintly. No more training do you require. Already know you that which you need. The boy hesitated. Then I am a Jedi. Yoda's eyes softened. Not yet. One thing remains. Vader. You must confront him. Then, only then, a Jedi will you be. Silence settled. The swamp outside murmured softly, as though mourning what was about to pass. Is Darth Vader my father? Luke asked. Yoda turned away, his voice barely a whisper. Your father he is. Rest, I must. Strong am I with the Force, but not that strong. Luke's eyes filled with sorrow. Master Yoda, you can't die. Soon will I rest, Yoda said gently. Forever sleep. Earned it, I have. The room dimmed as the fire burned low. Remember, he said, the Force will be with you. Always. And then, light. Yoda's body vanished, leaving only his robe behind. The Force swelled in the air, warm, eternal, unbroken. Luke bowed his head, not in grief, but in understanding. For he knew that the lesson was not in Yoda's words, but in his departure, that all life returns to the Force, and in surrender, one becomes eternal. The last Jedi Master was gone. But his voice, his wisdom, his light, would echo forever. The Force does not end. It transforms. And so did he. When Yoda's body faded into the ether of Dagobah's mist, the galaxy did not lose a master, it gained a presence eternal and unseen. The living Force, which he had spent centuries studying, at last welcomed him as part of its infinite current. His voice, once soft and mortal, became the whisper between stars, the murmur within every moment of peace that still survived the darkness. The age of the Jedi had ended, but Yoda's essence endured. In the years after his passing, Luke Skywalker carried his teachings into a galaxy still broken. Where others saw ruins, Luke saw the possibility of renewal. Yoda's wisdom had not been about battle or power, it had been about endurance, about harmony, about the courage to keep walking even when all light seems lost. And that courage shaped the destiny of generations to come. For Yoda's greatest triumph was not in war, but in what came after, in the understanding that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the acceptance of impermanence. He had seen empires rise and fall, heroes turn into tyrants, and legends decay into myth. Yet through it all, he learned that the Force, and life itself, could never be conquered, only forgotten. In the centuries that followed, whispers of him lingered wherever the Force was strong. Some said they saw him, a faint blue glow at the edge of a dying star, or a voice guiding lost travelers through impossible storms. To some, he was a god. To others, a ghost. But to those who truly listened, he was neither. He was memory made light. The Jedi Temple was gone. The archives turned to ash. But his teachings lived on not in books, nor holocrons, but in the quiet hearts of those who believed. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose, he had said, a lesson not of detachment, but of freedom. Because only in release do we find truth. Across the stars, the stories grew. Children whispered of the tiny green sage who could lift mountains and command the heavens. Soldiers invoked his name before battle, not as a prayer for victory, but for clarity. Even those who served the new order of the galaxy could not help but speak his name with a strange reverence, as though deep down, they too longed for the peace he represented. And in time, Yoda's life became legend. Not the kind carved in stone, but one carried in spirit, fluid, timeless, alive. His fall was remembered as a warning. His exile, as a meditation. His last lesson, as a promise that no darkness lasts forever. The Force, he once said, binds all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us. And so, though his body had vanished, Yoda was never truly gone. He lived in every act of compassion, in every whisper of the wind through ancient trees, in every spark of hope igniting within a broken soul. He became what the Jedi had forgotten they were meant to be, not warriors, but guardians of harmony. Not wielders of power, but vessels of balance. In the quiet beyond time, Yoda watched, not as a ruler of the past, but as a witness to the unfolding of destiny. He saw Luke pass on his teachings, and re-rise in an age where even the word Jedi was spoken like a myth. He saw balance tilt and right itself again, the eternal breath of the Force flowing as it always had. And in that endless rhythm, he smiled. He had spent a lifetime trying to understand the Force. In the end, the Force understood him. The swamp that had cradled his final days remained untouched, shrouded in mist and silence. Yet if one listens closely, beneath the hum of insects, beneath the sigh of the wind, there is a whisper, soft and eternal. Do or do not. There is no try. Not a command. Not a challenge. But a truth, that all who seek peace must first find it within. And so the legend endures. In every dawn that breaks after darkness. In every act of courage born from fear. In every quiet moment when the galaxy remembers that even the smallest light can defy the void. Yoda, the last master of light, became the living embodiment of that truth. For 900 years he guided the galaxy, but his greatest act was to let go, to vanish, so that others might rise, and in that surrender, he became eternal.